Stevens Point Historic Preservation Design Review Meeting, recorded February 3, 2021.
All right, sorry about that. Siebert?
Here.
Jennings is excused. McComb?
Yeah, here.
Scripps?
Here.
DeBush?
Here.
McFarland? I believe he was excused. And Kamer?
Here.
Awesome, we got a quorum.
Okay. Number 2, report of the January 6th meeting. Any comments or questions, additions? If not, I would entertain a motion to accept the, the report. Somebody?
I'll move to accept the report, Mary McComb.
Okay. A second, please.
I'll second.
Sarah, thank you. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, number 3 is a discussion on the collective goals of the historic preservation. Mr. Kuhn would like to go through these one by one, starting with enact a demolition by neglect ordinance. Any comments, Adam?
Yep, I'm just gonna quick new share the screen so I can show you the. All right, hopefully, can you all see the Word document?
Yes.
Showing, perfect. Yeah, so as the commissioners recall, last month we talked about just introducing the idea of goal setting, and for the purpose of this meeting now, since we received some individual goals from all of you, the purpose of this meeting is to go one by all of these collective goals that staff did an initial review on and disseminated, and then the purpose of this meeting is just more of a collaborative endeavor to talk about each goal, see, what we like about it, what are some challenges that could arise. If anybody, I know we've been working on this for another commission that this department staff. So if there's any commissioners who have an interest and want to take, more of a lead role on this, definitely feel free to speak out about that. But like I said, this is more of a collaborative effort where we're just going to be talking about each of these goals and talking about how we can make these goals come into fruition. So the first goal, as the chair mentioned, was to enact a demolition by neglect ordinance. So as this commission can recall, we've discussed this the last few months now, where essentially the purpose of a demo by neglect ordinance is to encourage properties, buildings that do not meet the criteria of a raise order per se, but there are standards of neglect that are happening, that there is a deteriorating state of the building, of the property, any specific feature on the property. So the purpose of this ordinance that other municipalities have taken is to have this commission, or likewise commissions in other municipalities, to encourage property owners and encourage a little bit more, have more rules in the book, so to speak, as far as enacting this type of ordinance, to encourage property owners to take some tender loving care of their properties, for lack of a better term. So does any commissioners have any discussions as far as, what you like about the ordinance, some challenges that you could see? And as you did see in this report, that there were some that, as you can see in this report, that we're anticipating, at least on the staff level, sometime this year, that we'll go through the reins of producing a draft document to this commission for review, and then subsequently later on, either that same meeting or the following meeting, this commission will vote on it, and then subsequently going through the common council for final review and adoption. So I don't know if any commissioners had any initial thoughts on this goal.
At whose cost? I'm sorry. At whose cost? City or the owner, or?
It would be, so as far as rehabbing specific buildings or things like that.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So how other ordinances have been set up was that essentially up to the discretion of the specific of the building superintendent, building inspectors. If there's a qualifying issue going on the building where it doesn't meet the standards of a raise order per se, but there are specific challenges from a building code standpoint that up to the discretion of the building inspector, if they determine that demolition by neglect is occurring, that proclamation, so to speak, would go forward to this commission by lieu of a public hearing where this commission would work with the property owner to determine a timeline and specify the specific type of actions that need to occur to correct this problem that would be occurring on the building structure, whatnot. So the cost per se would be going towards the property owner to build it back up to code.
Mr. DeBusch?
Adam, particularly like this, and I like the last sentence, which says, along with other locally recognized landmarks outside the historic district. How do you see that going forward in terms of designating those, working with property owners who may or may not want that to be the case? Can you discuss any ideas on that particular part?
Yeah, so I guess first and foremost, as far as a specific ordinance per se, that would be discussions that city staff would have to have with the attorney's office to see, would this be under the purview of this commission to have a demolition by neglect notice for a landmark that's outside of, say, a design review district, because there are landmarks where very infrequent, but there are a couple landmarks that are located outside of any historic district or design review district. So that would be something that city staff would have to have consultation with the city attorney to see, is that something that the commission can utilize, a demolition by neglect ordinance for landmarks outside of any of these review districts. But as far as the second part of your question regarding the landmarks, so as I mentioned in the last, I think an email I sent to you all about a few weeks now, that we do have on our website a landmarks application where, citizens to this day, today, for example, if they wanted to recognize a specific landmark in the city, in city limits, that they can apply for this application or fill out an application to designate said landmark as locally recognized landmark. And then it would go through the process of approval by this commission and then Common Council as well to effectively rectify that as a landmark. But one of the things that I know we'll address later on in some of these goals in that is that the last landmark that I recall that's gone through this commission for approval was dating back to about the early 2000s, about 2004, 2005, 6 so. But otherwise, most of the landmarks that have been locally recognized have been about 1970s, 1980s. So that would be something that, if we do get any more landmarks that are locally recognized, that's something that we would have to take a look at depending on the language of this ordinance.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Oh, yeah, Tim, this is Mary McComb. I'll turn on
Sure.
my video for everybody's enjoyment. And I know that however many years I've been back in town, I've seen demolition by, I don't know how this fits, but let me just use examples. The St. Stephen's Convent, they let it go until it had, they said it had to be demolished, and the Catholic Church didn't have any money for doing anything to that convent building. And then Eagle Plumbing, also, I think the mayor at that time really wanted to take that down. So in other words, I've seen buildings come down because they've been neglected, and I don't know if they had raise orders, but what can be, I don't understand what this ordinance has in it that could possibly stop the demolition. So if you could explain that if somebody could explain that, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure.
Can I make
So-
one comment to that too? Because both the examples that Mary made, the Eagle Building and the convent, the County Historical Society offered to take both buildings over, and they were refused by the owners at the time. So I don't know if that plays a role in any of this.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Somebody is willing to take it.
Yeah, so I guess I can go to the first part of your question, Commissioner McComb. So the purpose of a demolition by neglect ordinance would be essentially this middle area between a building being in good condition, that there's no structural issues from a building code standpoint, versus the other end of the spectrum where you meet that 50% threshold on the state level where a raise order would be in effect for a given structure, a given building. So this demolition by neglect ordinance would be in this middle area where that 50% threshold of costs that would have to occur for rehabbing a building would not be met in this case. And again, this would be subject to the review and determination by the building inspector. But so this is essentially this middle area where a raise order would not be in effect for any buildings that would qualify under this demolition by neglect ordinance, but this ordinance would act as a precursor to essentially make it so any buildings or structures that are seen to be deteriorating, that it doesn't get to that point where a raise order would become applicable, where the structural conditions of the building would be beyond a point of repair. So this is more as an act of goodwill to try to make it so any of that stuff that Commissioner McComb, as you mentioned, that wouldn't happen in the future, that the structural integrity of these buildings would remain sound.
So are owners then fined or encouraged or in some way invited to make the improvements on the building? Because it seems to me that I know the Catholic Church, they wanted that building to come down. So I guess I'm trying to understand if this is how this encourages building owners to keep up their property, or maybe it doesn't. I just don't get that. I understand middle ground and everything, but well, I mean, let's look at the church on Strongs and Brawley, which I think now is on the county tax rolls, but I've watched that building just deteriorate and deteriorate. And so what would this ordinance do to help save that building?
Sure. So so the kind of, I guess I can clarify again the process, how other municipalities have structured a demolition by neglect ordinance. And of course, this would be something that we would have to review and codify in our city ordinance. But essentially, once the building inspector determines that a demolition by neglect is occurring, that a raise order is in effect, but there's some structural problems with the building, a public hearing, the building inspector's determination would be sent over to this commission, and then within usually about like 30 days after the review or the receipt of a letter stating that demolition by neglect is occurring on a property, this commission will hold a public hearing, kind of like what Plan Commission holds for any applicable request, where the property owner would be notified, applicable city staff would be a part of this meeting, this commission, where we would discuss the issue at hand as far as what structural issues are occurring with this building, and then staff would essentially give our recommendation as far as outlining what steps need to be taken, what type of timeline would be given, and more of those finite details like that. And then within that public hearing, it'll essentially be outlined as far as, if action isn't taken, this is the sort of consequences, the sort of enforcement actions that would take place after the fact. And I know other municipalities have structured the enforcement component of it fairly differently. Some municipalities focus more on fines, some focused it more on treating it like any code enforcement violation that this department oversees, where you have so many weeks to rectify the issue, and then if subsequent letters get sent out for the same issue and no action is taken, then it will be citation after citation that would be issued against the property owner. But as far as any penalties per se, that would be something that would be outlined on the staff level and with this commission when we're reviewing an ordinance. So that's kind of like, I guess, a long about way to answer the process. So as far as your question, Commissioner McComb, the enforcement side of things would be dependent on what this commission and staff views would be most appropriate, if we want to do fines, citations, or some other component.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else on number 1?
Yeah, just to clarify, I mean, I'm Ginger Keemer, the new alternate. It sounds like what this does, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that buildings that fall under this ordinance, if it was passed, would be under a legal obligation to take the steps that are outlined in the public hearing by staff. I mean, does it give them some sort of, they're under obligation to take the steps of repair by law that the city officials outline in the hearing? I mean, is that?
Yeah, so that's effectively, the steps that would have to be taken as discussed in the public hearing. That's, if this commission would approve of that, and if council would subsequently approve of that as well, that's essentially what would be the staff report that we would send over to this commission and council. That would be this guiding document that would tell the specific property owner, this is what has to be done, the timeline, things like that. And then, like I said, as far as the legality of it, there'll be discussions that staff will have to have with the city attorney to see, how much legal power, so to speak, an ordinance like this would have. So I'll leave that discussion up to City Attorney Beveridge for that. But essentially what the staff report will say and what's outlined in the public hearing for this commission and council will dictate what steps the property owner has to take.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess another question, clarification. So compare this to a property that is not historical.
Mm-hmm.
And the inspector says, there are some issues here that need to be addressed. If it's a non-historical property, the owner might say, no thanks, I'll tear it down. Versus a historical property where the commission or common council will say, no, that's not an option.
So that's a good point that you brought up. So as far as the differences between a building in a historic district versus a building that's not located in a historic district. So if there would be any building code violations on a building outside of a historic district, the building inspectors would reach out to them. And if there is a violation based on the building code that was subject at the time that, such structure was built, they would follow suit in terms of sending non-compliance letters, and then if the issue isn't finalized, then citations thereafter. The difference, what would happen, so while that process would be similar in most types of demolition by neglect ordinances that other municipalities have had, the main kicker here would be that there would be the public hearing before this commission, and then council will review the request as well to make sure that, kind of like a design review, that whatever steps need to be taken, that would be done in accordance to the specific design review guidelines that this commission has. So if there's an issue, say a deteriorating chimney, this commission has specific guidelines for how to repair any chimneys located in the historic district. So the purpose of that public hearing would also in part focus on what type of remediation steps would need to occur based on the guidelines.
Okay, thanks.
Anything further? Okay, number 2. the city's website, making it more interactive and user-friendly. Any comments?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just give a quick rundown. So I personally really like this goal because, just like the last couple of days when I was reviewing the city's website in relation to any historic preservation documents, tabs, things like that, there's some things that would need to be updated in terms of, I know there's some documents that reference my predecessor, Director Karnowski's predecessor, just like in general, just making it more accommodating, user-friendly, more interactive. So like one of the things that I was thinking that would be pretty cool, and I'll have to see if community media would be able to do it, is to essentially have an interactive map where we can point out, the specific historic buildings in the city, any historic landmarks that we'll just have a dot on top of that building. And if you want to click on that building, it'll show, some pictures of the building, maybe give a background on the history of it, when this commission adopted it as a landmark, things like that. So what staff would be looking at now in relation to this goal is, what are some things that you would like to see on the city's website to make it more interactive, more user-friendly, more intriguing to the eye, so to speak.
Questions?
I just really like this idea. I agree. I think that it could be more user-friendly, and I think that would be an awesome idea to put in our plan.
Yeah, this is Ginger. I took a look at the link that you included, and I can't remember what city in Montana it was, but I really liked how they did kind of the side-by-side photos of the current downtown and then like some historic photos. And I know there's a ton of historic photos out there of Stevens Point and Portage County. So it seems like, yeah, if you could find a way to bring those to the city site so people have a chance to see them more, that would be great.
Anything else? Okay. Excuse me. Number 3, review the city's facade improvement grant program. Any comments or questions, Mr. Kuhn?
Yeah, so the purpose of this goal that I believe a few commissioners had was essentially to make it so that the city's facade improvement grant program has this nice medium where, we want to make the facade improvement grant, I wouldn't say a difficult process, but it has to be, you have to put a fair amount of work into it because, if you want X amount of grant dollars, and if this commission will review it, we want to make sure that the program is robust and comprehensive enough where we're effectively not giving money away, so to speak. But however, we also want to make it so that we can increase more participation amongst property owners in any of these historic districts, the design review district, so that they can encourage, so that they would meet the criteria to apply for this facade improvement grant program. Because I believe in 2020, we had 2 requests that came before this commission. And I can't speak, of course, to the last few years, but I know when I've looked in the past, it seems relatively minor to the point where we don't use up as much money as what's allocated each year in the city's budget for facade improvement grant program, for the facade improvement grant program. So what city staff is looking at now is, what we would be looking at doing is to take a robust look at the requirements for this program and see, are there deviations, are there modifications that could occur in terms of, the program boundary, the specific work details that are included versus are prohibited for facade improvement grant money, things like that. So I guess if there's any, comments any of the commissioners have as far as, ways to make it more, to increase participation for the facade improvement grant program, I would love to hear, because even outside of the program requirements itself, there's a slew of educational opportunities that we could do as well to help increase participation of this program. So see, Commissioner Kamer has a question.
One thing I thought of as an idea for outreach, and this might be something that you've already done, is I know there's a downtown, like a Stevens Point Alliance, which I assume is like kind of like a business council for downtown. And I wonder if the commission or someone on city staff could reach out to them. I don't know if they have meetings, but I mean, it seems like those, and again, maybe some of those business owners are renters, maybe they don't own the building that, but yeah, it seemed like reaching out. I think it's downtown Stevens Point, which I don't know, Mary, maybe you had experience with that group with Sugar Doll. And then also
ages ago, but I don't even, I think they're the Downtown Alliance now, and I don't know how they operate.
Yeah. I saw their website, but it doesn't really have anyone's name. I mean, it's just downtownpointwisconsin.com. But, and I'm not sure how, you know, how many businesses are a part of that. And then again, I mean, there's the Portage County Business Council, but obviously that extends all the way through Portage County. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of those people, you know, it's not relevant to them, but that was one idea I had.
Adam, and it was, I think last weekend I did it, but when I read through the program description, it doesn't specifically say businesses. Is that the case, that it's restricted just to businesses?
I would have to double check, but I believe it's not. I believe it's, as far as the requirements for this program, you know, it has to be located within TIF 6. Yeah, as from what I recall, that there's not any requirements that, you know, it has to be solely for commercial use, but that's of course something that staff can take a look at and verify.
You're gonna have to do that, because we applied for a grant and we're told that nonprofits couldn't apply.
Oh, wow.
It was strictly for business. So we'll have to clarify that somehow.
Sure.
I guess personally, that would be something, and I included in my goals, is I think we're getting fairly close to most of the businesses downtown that have improved their facades. But when I tell people that I live in Stevens Point, they say, oh, those streets, what are those streets? All those big, beautiful houses on those streets. They don't talk about the downtown. They talk about those big, beautiful houses on Clark Street and Main Street. They're, I just think, critical to our identity. And I think there's a good number, a fair number of them that, you know, if they had some incentive, even those that are, you know, rental properties, to make some improvements on their facades, I think that would be really valuable for the image of our city. So if it's not the case now with the grant as it's currently structured, you know, I would really encourage looking at the possibility of expanding this to residential properties.
And there was a case a couple of years ago too, of a homeowner who was putting vinyl siding on her house on Clark and could not afford to adhere to the guidelines. And it was a real shame. It was something that happened through a mishap of her contractor. And I think that she was kind of a perfect example of somebody who could really benefit from a program like this. And that makes me think too, that most likely it wasn't available for residential homes, at least at that point.
Wasn't that a case where the work was done before? And there's been a couple of those situations where work is done before supposedly somebody realizes they need to get approval from this commission.
I don't think, I was on council then, and I remember that. It's the little house on Clark and Wyatt. And yeah, it was, I don't think the work was done, not all, well, but anyhow, anyway. She didn't have the money. And I remember that was a tough one. But yeah, some people just don't have the money.
Yeah, and you should see on your screen now, as far as the program boundary, what properties would be eligible, at least strictly from a locational aspect. And you can see here it's correlated with the TIF 6 boundary. So, you know, one of the discussions that could have internally is to see, you know, are there opportunities where we could expand the boundary where the site improvement grant program would be eligible. If it could be expanded eastwards down Main and Clark, or farther south down towards City Hall. I mean, that's something that staff can take a look at and see if that would be possible or not.
But don't we already have a historical neighborhood on Clark Street and Main Street that's not on this map?
We
and does
do.
Does a facade improvement grant cover that?
So in
I
terms
think
of
that's what.
Yeah, in terms of the project boundary, it would not. So if you could see on the other boundary, it essentially ran up to, I think, about here and north, kind of this, where if you're following along with my cursor, it does not extend farther east, like where the existing Clark Street Historic District is, and then all the proposed historic districts that we'll talk about later. Those are not included in the facade improvement grant program project study, so to speak.
Well, in that case, I'll echo Joe that if we could make, I mean, at least the Main and Clark corridors eligible for facade improvement grants.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, to expand it just beyond just businesses to something far bigger. Houses or nonprofits or whatever it happens to be.
So if you could look into that and explore that more of it, I would certainly support that.
All right, do we have any more comments for this goal?
Okay, go on to number 4. Educate
Yes.
property owners.
Yep, so I believe this was actually your goal, Chair, as far as, or maybe, can't recall. So the purpose of this goal would essentially be to kind of echo some of the past discussions that we've had to try to educate property owners within these historic districts, within the design review district, to basically be aware of our design review requirements for any work that has been, any work that would be proposed. And like we've talked about before, any work without permits. Now, it is, I think I've only dealt with one since my tenure here in the city as far as a work without permit in a historic district, but it creates a whole ball of wax in terms of, you know, what steps could be done for work that already was done in a historic district. So are there ways that we could educate the public more about, hey, you're located in a historic district. What does this mean to be located in a historic district as far as the any financial incentives in terms of claiming tax grants, things like that. Any design review guidelines that you would have to follow for any type of work you'd be done, if it's a, facade improvement, things like that. So I don't know if there's any comments this commission has as far as what type of educational initiatives you think would be most appropriate, if, flyers or video messages, things like that would be better in your eyes?
Well, some years ago, the commission brought up a guy from the State Historical Society to talk about tax incentives, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, COVID prevents that at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can do something like that, a public program, it happened to be at the library, to talk to owners, and then to dovetail it into what we were just talking about in terms of expanding possibility of a facade grant, a matching grant of some sort or another for buildings outside, to go to Mr. DeBush's point, the houses.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's definitely one of the challenges now as far as we're dealing with this with the Bike and Ped Commission, as far as, there's a lot of educational initiatives that staff and the commission wants to do now, but we're limited just because of the ongoing pandemic in terms of any, face-to-face, in-person interaction. But I definitely like that once, COVID is come and gone, that's definitely would be welcoming to have some public programs, some workshops that are explaining this. So, anybody else have any questions or comments, I should say?
I guess this is Ginger again. One idea too, I know when we bought our house 7 years ago, our real estate agent gave us like a packet of materials all about, Point and the county and things that were involved. So I wonder if the commission or the department could provide real estate agents who are selling homes in the historic district with, flyers and whatnot, so that as new homeowners come in with these buildings, they're aware, from the start, or they have someone, they're directed to someone who they can ask questions to or whatnot. So again, that would be a small number of just, new people coming in, not existing residents, but.
No, I really like that, because one of the, we're kind of getting a little, this would be a little off track, but some of the issues that like I would face with outside of a historical realm, say for example, any occupancy limitations for any rental properties, for example. And I know this has been a strong pursuit of this department to have more dialogue with the landowner or landlords to, better explain what are our requirements, what are our guidelines. So I really like your example too, as far as, trying to branch out our requirements, our conditions to, other parties who have a real interaction with these properties in the historic district. That if we can kind of, guide the ship to these real estate agents and let them know that, hey, if you have any future property transactions that you deal with, let these incoming property owners know, hey, you're located in a historic district, these are your requirements, things like that would fold pretty well with at least, any day-to-day actions. And I don't know if that's I don't know what extent real estate agents deal with that right now, but that's definitely something we can take a look at.
Anything else? Okay, move on to number 5, creating a map. Do we already have that?
Not that I have ever seen. We have, as far as all of our building landmarks, we have basically a table that outlines the address, the type of, if it's a building, if it's a landmark, if it's a district, things like that. But nothing as far as any maps, interactive features, things like that. No.
Okay.
And I assume that would go on the website too, that you.
Correct. And one of the things that we would have to take a look at as staff is to see if there's been any updates in the report since its publication 2011, for example. Is there any updated information that would be applicable depending on the types of maps that we would be interested in versus what was talked about in this report?
But what we could be doing, and you're talking about Tim Hegelin's document there, that one where we did every house in the city. It would be, I think, absolutely fascinating to overlay on some city map the date of construction of the houses. My house was built in 1894, and probably other homes on my block, and that wouldn't change. So I don't know, and maybe it would get people to thinking, wow, my house was built in 1894, maybe those modern casement windows wouldn't look so good on it. I don't know, but.
Yeah, I will say another benefit to that, I believe the commissioner who thought about this goal had, was that it could better illustrate the extent of any historic buildings, historic landmarks that are located outside of any local historic districts, any of the design review district as well, to see, as we'll discuss later on, any proposed historic districts, is there a correlation with, is there a fair amount of, historical buildings and landmarks that are located in proposed historic districts that just haven't gone through the threshold of local, state, or federal designation yet?
Okay. Would it also include a brief history of the building?
Yeah, I think that's something that I could talk with our JS technician as far as, if we do like a point-to-point feature where, like I was kind of alluding to before, if there's a button dot over said building or landmark that would give a description, it includes some pictures, some historical photos, some present day photos of the building or landmark. So that's definitely something I can talk with our JS technician to see if that's possible.
I had a discussion, this is about 2 years ago, with John Gardner, who used to be in your department.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he suggested at the time was putting some sort of marker on a building saying what the building originally was, the so-and-so building, and what date it was built, as an outside marker, maybe in the sidewalk or on the building or something like that. Is that a possibility to go along with creating a map?
On the buildings?
Or on the sidewalk, in the sidewalk?
So any land or any markers that'd be on the sidewalk, that I would have to talk with the Public Works Department to see if, since they would have control over, any work being done there and if that's feasible or not. As far as on private property, that I would speculate would be pretty difficult to do if there's any of these buildings that are outside of, city ownership, for example.
Okay.
I know that when I've traveled to England, a lot of buildings have markers on them, historical markers. I don't know if it's a government program or what, but it's occurred to me as I walk around the central part of Stevens Point. I mean, it might be neat for people to put up markers again of the construction date of their house, or I don't know. But I'm a history nut, so maybe it's just me.
And actually, I think that those historical markers would bode well with one of the goals that we'll talk about later on, as far as signage in our historic districts. Are there, what type of signage would be beneficial? What kind of pop out, so to speak, that, if you're a commuter on Main Street heading into town, that hey, you're driving into a historic district. Are there, signage opportunities that we could do to help, exaggerate that? But we can discuss that more once we get to that goal, but that's would definitely be a worthwhile discussion to have.
Anything else? All right, let's move on to number 6 then. The tours of downtown.
Yeah, I guess I don't really have a whole lot to say. I love the idea that, I think this is something that, we put down at tentative timeline of 2021, 2022. Obviously, any in-person tours, face-to-face interactions would be subject to, once the ongoing pandemic has come and gone. But one of the things I believe I mentioned in here is that, could there be a way, at least in the short term, where we could, do a self-guided tour where, a few folks essentially create some videos of, designated routes, maybe one video for the Clark Street district or whatever, and put that on the web, send that out to property owners, put that on our city's Facebook page, Twitter page, things like that. So if anybody wants, any locals, any visitors of the city wants to take a self-guided tour, at least in the interim, they'd be able to do so. And like I said, like I include in there, partner with local businesses to highlight these historic areas as well, would, at least in staff's opinion, would go a long ways as well.
I was at a meeting of Create Portage County about a year ago, and I think Ryan Kronowski was there, but it had to do with neighborhoods and making neighborhoods more cohesive. But one of the things that was discussed was designing a walking tour of the 9th district and pointing out the historic parts of the 9th district. And then of course the pandemic happened. So, Chris Claysmith, I think, is the person at Create Portage County who was pulling that together, but they might be good partners.
Absolutely.
I will say, yeah, I think it would be really helpful on that one to think about scope well in advance, because this is a kind of project that can be very time consuming and expensive. And so knowing what, especially if you start getting interviews and oral histories, and then you want to think about metadata for like storing those and photographs. I mean, I've worked on a project like that in the past, and it took us years to develop these kinds of things with a lot of funding behind it. You can do it much smaller. so scope, I think, is probably my recommendation for that particular goal, making sure that it's a feasible goal and maybe scaling up after there's a sort of infrastructure in place for it.
I agree.
Well, and you could also have topics within your tours, like the Mural Tour or something like that. We do a murder tour, well, not because of COVID now, but we've done a murder tour of downtown, and that's drawn well over 100 people every time we've done it.
Wow.
So those are popular. Maybe it's just the topic, but we've also drawn a lot of people to tours of the murals. So you might be able to focus different topics on the tours.
I like that.
Anything else? Okay. Go on to 2022, 2025 goals. Number 1, additional signage.
Yeah.
Any comments there?
So this is kind of something that we were just alluding to, that, you know, what staff would want to know kind of at the onset is, you know, what types of signage do you think would be appropriate to highlight that you're entering any historic districts, to promote wayfinding in general. So some of the pictures that I believe it was Alder Jennings who mentioned this goal was, you know, on the top of any stop signs, it would have an arrow pointing, you know, Clark Street Historic District that way, for example. You know, is that something that would be desired? Or having any sort of wayfinding signs that would, you know, any sort of directional signs that would point out, you know, specific landmarks of interest that you want to point out, highlighting, you know, where is its general location that we can include along the street frontage. Is that something that I believe Alder Jennings had as well? So right now we're looking at, you know, what type of signage do you think would you have interested in including for, you know, any additional signage to promote this wayfinding?
Would a large
I've
sign?
been in this.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mary.
I've been in districts where the street signs in historical districts are actually a different color, you know, usually some sort of old-fashioned-y looking color. And it indicates you're in there's probably some other things on the signs too, but it indicates you're in an historic district.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Holiday Road sign that we had for the square here during the Christmas season, during the holiday season, where I believe there was more, you know, your decorative red background, green letters. I don't know if there's any, you know, state requirements or at least approvals that we need to take place outside of on a local level, but that's something definitely we can take a look at. Because that's actually something I thought of too, that, you know, having different color schemes, if it's doable, would be a better way of, you know, having that stand out more.
There are a couple of towns down in the south of Milwaukee that actually have on the highway, on the interstate, so-and-so's historic district, take exit, whatever. Is that something that's viable?
So the signage in terms of who would have jurisdiction, who would have review over, would be primarily determined on, what type of road it is. If it's a local residential road, then in that case, it would be primarily, Director Badoon and his department who would take a look at it and make sure, all the applicable requirements are met, that any clear view requirements are met, that it doesn't pose any vision obstructions. But if for any state roads, that would be I could definitely envision the state having to review and sign off on that. And then plus, evidently, that would likely prolong the process as well. So that's something that we can take a look at. But for sure, any type of sign that we would be thinking about here would require Public Works review and approval. So they would have first stab at it, essentially.
Well, just
And
off the
really,
top-
before
Go
we
ahead. Go ahead, Mary.
before we started advertising historic districts on the highway, it would be good to have brochures and maps and signage in the district itself. Otherwise, people would get off the road and not exactly know what they're looking for.
That small little green space just east of the castle, could a sign be put up there talking about the downtown historic district?
So
I don't know who owns that piece of property.
yeah, I mean, regardless of, if it is, I don't know if it's a city-owned property or if it's not, but, it would be subject to a lot of factors, frankly, in terms of, how big the sign would be, things like that. Because one of the things, if it would be located outside of the right of way, is that I would have to make sure that, said signs meet our sign code requirements as well. So, for example, I'm guessing out there, typically any signs out there, maybe about, depending on this exact zoning district, it's usually like 20 to 100 square feet in size, depending, again, what zoning district falls in. So you would be limited in that standpoint, but that's something we can definitely take a look at.
Okay.
I mean, I know that you actually already have it in your recommendations to partner with Create, but as Mary was describing, there was a push, and I'm not sure where it's at, of like actually creating neighborhood identities, where neighborhoods might be named or given, like, because it seems like, especially near the downtown area, if there isn't this like distinct character that kind of distinguishes between different neighborhoods. And so it might make sense to have that be part of this conversation. And I like I said, I'm not privy to where they're at in that process, but.
Yeah, and this is something that, like, as you had mentioned, that Create Portage County, any other local organizations, I can definitely have lots of collaboration with. And I think this would be something where, it would be more of a collaborative effort, that it would be something that it wouldn't be just the city who would work on that. Likely other organizations as well would give input on.
In addition to Create Portage County, I thought I had heard that the Stevens Point Area Convention Bureau was working on different like wayfaring signs for the city in general. I don't know if that's true, but I thought I had heard that discussed somewhere. So if they are, I mean, yeah, that seems like another great partner, or possible partner.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Okay. Establish a historic preservation plan.
Yeah, so this plan is outlined in this commission's guidelines, essentially to have such a plan established and rectified. And I know, at least in my initial review of how other municipalities have structured their plans, usually it's coupled with any cultural preservation plans as well. And I know this is something that Commissioner Scripps, you had as well as one of your goals, is to focus on, to at least incorporate the cultural aspect as well, such as the tribal lands that were designated on campus. Are there ways that we can include cultural preservation as well within a plan? And I will say, just as far as the procedural motion and, what requirements or what actions would be located in such a plan. Let me hop on over to the other screen. So the outline, the guidelines, the steps that would be included in such a plan would be on your screen right now. So essentially talking about any structural requirements in terms of size, in terms of scale. And some of these, you know, as you're reading through it now, or if you've done so in the past, some of these are similar, are compatible with our design review guidelines as well. It would just be something that we would have a more focused, more honed in historic preservation plan. And this is something too that we can target on a district by district level, whereas we have a historic preservation plan just for Clark, just for the downtown, because, for example, the facade requirements, the street out, the proportion between the width and the height in the facade shall be visually compatible with the building and environment with which it is visually related. For example, those requirements may differ for the Clark Street Historic District, or at least what you would want versus that of any downtown building. So that's one thing that staff in this commission will have to discuss is, for having a historic preservation and cultural plan, is that something that should be a citywide plan, or should we establish individual plans for each historic district? And that's, something we don't need to know, at least rectify now, but that's something that we should have a discussion on at some point. And I guess just as far as a process standpoint too, any plan that would be produced by staff would be reviewed by this commission and approved by this commission, and then afterwards it would also have to go before a plan commission and council for review and then finally adoption as well. So I guess what staff is looking at right now is, like I said, first and foremost, would you like to have a historic preservation plan focus citywide or on a district by district level? And then, are there any components, at least focusing on the cultural preservation standpoint, that you would want included in such a plan? Are there areas of focus that you want staff to take a look at?
Personally, I would think using that State Historical Society analysis that they did some years ago, where he broke it down into districts. I think that would be a great way to go, just looking at each district and what makes it unique.
Do you mean aldermanic districts? I don't think he did that, but like he had a section on.
The one that I'm thinking of specifically is the one on the east part of the city behind the rail car restaurant. I can't think of the name of it right now.
Oh, but you're talking about Clover Hill.
Silver Coach?
The 1950s buildings, all kind of match.
Circle. Yep.
Sunset Circle.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So that kind of the Clark Street area, the Main Street area, all those kinds of districts have a separate. Well, go ahead.
What he also did was had general sections on like church buildings or school buildings or industry, manufacturing buildings. It was nicely organized. I was going to say that whatever historic preservation does also needs to be incorporated into the city's strategic plan, which I know Melissa Johnson is pushing for a strategic plan. I don't know what the status is, but it should be part of that as well.
Yeah, and I would say one of the reasons why staff felt that, at least from a timeline standpoint, that this would be, a more prolonged process is that, any size requirements, height requirements that we would want that would be located in a historic preservation plan, staff would like to discuss that in combination with when staff is going forward with their zoning code rewrite, just because at least our perception is that if we're going to be doing any changes to the or establishing a historic preservation plan focusing on any structural requirements in place, that we would want to have that coupled with the zoning code rewrite as well, so everything's in unison, so there isn't any contradictory language, so to speak.
I can speak to the cultural resources kind of aspect of this. I am not sure if this would be part of the same plan or if it would be something distinct, nor am I sure if our commission would actually oversee something like a cultural resources management plan. That might be a different entity. I'm not sure. What I will say is that what's happening on campus is that we are talking with the tribal historic preservation officers to come up with a plan to protect any cultural resources that we have already identified of historic or prehistoric Native American burials that will then, if we ever discover more, which we might, would be protected. And so this is something that the city could do preemptively. We also do know that there are historic and prehistoric burials right within the city boundaries. And so making sure that those are protected and having a conversation with tribal leaders about the best way to move forward. And so that's just to put a recommendation. It might be a recommendation outside of this commission altogether, but that's where that was the angle I was taking in my recommendation, so.
Sure.
Anything further? Any more comments? Okay. Want to go back to the goals? It would be number 3.
Yeah, so this would be probably the most significant goal in terms of just size and scale. And so I believe all the commissioners had this goal, at least had this goal within their worksheet, is that to essentially create a strategic plan for how we should target any future locally recognized historic districts or any historic districts that would be nominated to the State and National Register of Historic Places. So the city has had discussions about this in the past. I'm sure folks who were here back in 2015, 2016 are aware of some of these, and these are located on the website. But let me pull up, just for starters. So I had this up before, but these are the full list of existing historic districts plus any proposed historic districts that have also been fought after as part of the intensive survey back in 2011. So the expansion of Clark Street, you had the intersection of Church and Ellis, you had right on the corner here City Hall, over on Clover Street, and then over by Sunset Fork, that intersection as well. They have a few properties in there as well. So what staff would be looking in a historic plan, first off, is separating the local designation and the state and federal designation first. Is that, what should this commission prioritize in terms of any future local historic districts? Are there, of these that are located on your, or of these that are shown on your screen, are there any proposed historic districts that are preferred that we should take, greater focus, greater emphasis on to start, and then others that, we should kind of put on the back burner to start? And then on the state and national register of historic places as well, outside of, obviously, as the Clark Street Historic District is going through this process as well, which we'll talk about in the staff update. But what should be the next historic district that we should focus on as far as state and national designation as well? And talking in addition to this prioritization model, so to speak, is what should the process be? And I have it shown on the screen here as far as what Director Ostrowski and my predecessor, Kyle Kearns, have talked about in the past as far as steps to take. So you can see here, staff meets with the State Historic Preservation Office to determine the eligibility of district nomination, hold historic district workshops, create a letter of intent to apply for CLG funds, submit the CLG application, and then reach out to a consultant if it's Tim or if it's somebody else to actually submit the district nomination application. So that would be one of the sections in the strategic plan, so to speak, would be focusing on the process, so to speak, because what we would like, at least on a staff level, is, after COVID, to have these interactions with any property owners that are located in these proposed historic districts, where we would talk about, you know, what does it mean to be located in a historic district? What are the benefits for the property owner personally to be in a historic district? If it's, you know, tax credits, if it's, you know, any, you know, these more stringent design review requirements, things like that. So that would be the focus of a strategic plan as well. And lastly, another section too would be more so a review of these proposed historic districts, as well as to determine these proposed historic districts, the Sunset Fork off of Plover, the one by City Hall here, do those still meet the requirements for state and national designation of a historic place or not? Likely it hasn't changed too drastically from 2011 to 2021 now, but that would be one thing that staff would want to take a look at and outline is, you know, have the standards of review changed over the last 10 years that would either work well in our favor or would pose additional challenges potentially. So the reason why we put this as a pretty extensive goal, so to speak, and also the timeline, and likely very well could push past 2025 as well, is, you know, just the scope of what a strategic plan would look like, and then of course funding as well. You know, if we would go out and apply for a state and national designation for one of these proposed historic districts, we would have to reach out to a consultant, and that would obviously cost money to do so, and time as well for them to do their analysis, filling out the application and going through the procedural ranks of state, national designation. So I guess that's probably a long about way to describe it. And I guess I'll reiterate too, for the local historic designation, that is a relatively straightforward process, so to speak, in terms of a review. So in short, you know, if a proposal comes to nominate this district as a historic district, this location as a historic district, this commission would take a look at it, Common Council would take a look at it, and then adopt it as well. So the process is significantly different in terms of time, but that's something that staff would want to outline in such a plan to focus on, you know, what should we prioritize first based off of these proposed districts shown on your screen. So I don't know if you had any commissioners had thoughts on, you know, what area you want to focus on first, or, you know, what steps should be outlined in a strategic plan for, you know, the background work, you know, encouraging property owners, talking to property owners, things like that.
Anybody have any comments? Would it make sense to do the Main Street and the Clark Street ones first as kind of an entry into the downtown area? Since many people coming into the community would obviously go through those areas to begin with, either coming from the east or the west.
Those are underway currently, aren't they? I mean, they're in process.
So this, as you can see on your red outline, that's the existing local historic district. The state and federal, that's still in the process yet. So that hasn't been squared away yet in terms of us hearing out, especially on the federal side, as far as has the Clark Street Historic District been classified as a national historic place or not. So that's something that we're still kind of waiting on. And I guess this will actually be a staff update too, but I guess I can talk about it now since it's pertinent. So we did hear back from the state back in, I believe it was winter of 2019, as far as the Clark Street historic area being designated as a state historic place. The federal level, we're still waiting on. We haven't heard. You know, typically, it wouldn't take as long, over a year now, but I'm guessing, you know, just with COVID, how prolonged of a process it is for these internal agencies to review it, it's likely going to take some time yet before we hear back. So, you know, part of the strategic plan would also hinder on what we hear from the feds in terms of a historic place for Clark as well.
Now, are you talking about just the part that's outlined in red or the whole blue part?
That was, I believe it was just the red part that was. The area outline extended out further, that's a proposed expansion off of the existing Clark Street district.
Well, that's kind of what I'm suggesting, is I think in terms of
Okay.
people coming into the city, wouldn't that make it make more sense as a priority?
Absolutely.
Yep, I would agree with that too.
Some of the others are kind of off the beaten path. They're important certainly, but they're not on the main corridors of the city.
Okay.
Any other comments? Anybody?
I also see those
No,
other areas as kind of a little more stable than even on a Clark Street, Main Street, with some of that student housing on Clark and Main. You know, there may be some turnover with all these new apartments coming up that you know, might be of value to have that area under more protection.
Yeah, stabilize it.
I agree. I think that area should be our priority right now.
Again, I don't want to downplay any of the other areas because they're obviously important, but that one just seems to me to be the main one in terms of coming and going main corridors of the city. Okay, any other comments? Mr. Kuhn?
I don't for this goal, no.
Okay. You want to go then to staff update?
Yeah, I guess the only staff update that I had was just, you know, the restatement that we've heard over a year now for the state designation for Clark Street, but not for the federal level. But of course, staff will keep you posted when we hear on the national level as far as the Clark Street Historic Place. So,
Okay.
Otherwise, that's all that staff has at this time.
Anybody else have anything to add or? Seeing
I
none?
appreciate you organizing all this, Adam.
Yes, definitely.
Very well done.
Yeah, so I guess lastly, what I can say is, at least from a process standpoint, so we'll meet next month, likely the first Wednesday, but I'll reach out to you a few weeks down the road. But what will happen is staff will put together a strategic plan outlining all of these goals in a little bit more detail, talking about what are going to be the specific steps to accomplish each goal, what's going to be the timeline, what parties are going to be involved in each step of each goal, and then followed by, you know, what challenges would we likely face and what are some ways that we can rectify it. So, and a classic challenge that you'll probably see in some of these goals is we would be limited in the short term for, you know, some educational initiatives due to the ongoing pandemic, that you might have to focus, for example, on any multimedia programming instead of face-to-face interaction. So expect to see something like that, and we'll discuss that whole plan next month.
Thank you. All right, if there is nothing else, we are adjourned. 3:14.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.